All right, well, good evening and welcome to You Good Healing the Hurt. My name is Jim Donnelly and I'm a member and an elder at Westminster Presbyterian Church. Tonight we are continuing our series of mental health check-ins, acknowledging the challenges that are associated with this continuing time of pandemic and uncertainty. I'm pleased to be again joined by our three expert guides who will help us continue this journey together. Reverend Caroline Sell is a pastor here at Westminster, and congregational care is one of her focus areas. Dr. Scott Young is a professor and Dean's Fellow of Innovation in the Department of Counseling and Educational Development at UNC Greensboro. He's also a member here at Westminster. And Dr. Kelly Graves is the founder and executive director of the Kellin Foundation. It's a nonprofit here in Greensboro that focuses on building resilience in individuals, families, and communities. Behind the scenes, we are being supported by Reverend Sam Perkins. Thank you, Sam, for your continued support of our work. Thus far, we have tried to name and tend to the different hurts that each of us may be experiencing. And we recognize that those aren't necessarily all over and done with. However, this evening, we do want to focus more on the process of healing and beginning to look forward. We're going to be exploring a little both what healing is and what it's not. Unlike a simple broken bone, healing in this case does not mean just going back to the way it was before. The time of transition that many of us feel like we're in and beginning to move through it, it may be difficult, it's ambiguous, it may in and of itself be full of disorientation as we become aware even of some of the weight and the discomfort that we've been carrying. I think we all are aware that healing is an ongoing process and maybe repetitive, and we have to move through cycles multiple times. There's no discrete endpoint necessarily. And for all of us, it's got physical and mental and emotional and spiritual dimensions. There may quite possibly be scars, and we may be changed people moving forward. With all of us having gone through this time together, there's potential for us to work on healing in community as well. Now, tonight, we may not be able to accomplish all the healing that we would like, but hopefully we want to position each of us to move through successfully our own healing process. We are recording this program so it can be available to those who can't be with us here this evening. This is the Zoom webinar platform. You're welcome to use the chat feature to share comments with everyone or just the panelists. We also invite you to use the Q&A feature. A little further on in the program, we will invite you, if you have any particular things that you would like our speakers to address, to use the Q&A feature. And I just want to again say thank you for joining us this evening. One of the ways that we are all coping with this strange time is through community, even if it's virtually. And so we appreciate your taking time and being with us tonight and supporting each other. To open us in prayer and to share briefly about how God and our faith may help us in this healing process, I would like to turn it over to Pastor Caroline.
Good evening, everyone. So glad that you're joining us. I'm going to open us in prayer. If you have been journeying with us through the first two sessions, I figured why change it up. I just felt like we'll keep it consistent. So I'm going to open the same way that we've opened in prayer in the first two, and that's using a simple breath prayer. So the invitation is to get comfortable. If you can, put your feet on the ground. If you're comfortable with what you're doing right now, close your eyes. And I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath. And as you breathe in, to say, I am here. And as you breathe out, to say, God is here. I'm going to invite you to do that twice more, just thinking in your mind that saying, breathing in, I am here. God is here. One more time, breathing in, I am here. Breathing out, God is here. Amen. So I was asked to kick us off a little bit, thinking about how God holds us in love, and out of that invites us into healing. If you have heard me speak over the last few years at Westminster, if you're a Westminster person, you have heard me say over and over, there's nothing that you can do to separate, there's nothing we can do to separate us from God's love. Sometimes I feel like I'm a broken record, quoting the Apostle Paul there, saying that over and over again. There's nothing we can do to separate us from God's love. And so that's the first thing I thought of when thinking about how does God hold us in love, is that it is so challenging to remember what I think is that truth, that God loves us unconditionally. And I think there's a podcast that I listened to by a Duke divinity professor named Kate Bowler, some of you have heard of, who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer several years ago, but does a podcast. And she talks about how even in the pandemic, we are being asked to enter into endless progress and to prove our worth. And I think there was a point in my life where I thought that ended like at the end of high school. Like if you're a high schooler listening, I know people talk all the time about how it's not about your grades, or it's not about where you go after school. It's not about how much people like you or how much like social media, like attention you get. You know, you are loved no matter what. Hopefully you hear that message. And I think I heard that a lot in high school. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just like make it through high school and I'll push through and remember that people love me, God loves me. And then like, this will get easier. And what I found was that it was the opposite. I got to college and sitting in, a dorm room on a Saturday night by myself and thought, oh my gosh, I have no friends, no community. I'm completely alone. No one loves me. Or I bombed a test and thought I'm going to fail. I'm worth nothing. Never going to get a job after this. My life is over. That did not happen. Graduated and got out in the world, moved through my 20s, and just found that in every stage in life, it is so difficult to remember how loved I am and how loved each of us are. And so I think as we start from the perspective of faith, at least thinking about healing, that's where we've got to start, is that you are loved unconditionally. God loves you yesterday, today, and tomorrow, completely apart from this journey of healing that we're inviting you to embark on. And, I am a firm believer. There's a quote that some people quote a lot that sometimes it gets attributed to Anne Lamott, that God loves you just the way you are and also loves you enough for you not to stay that way, or something to that effect. And I believe that's true. We're invited to change. We're invited into healing. We're invited to heal the world. That's what one of the parts of our mission statement at Westminster is. But I think it first starts with remembering that you are loved unconditionally. It has nothing to do with what you produce or how good you come out of this pandemic, or whether or not you are the first person to come back to church on what we hope will be June 6th. You are loved, your church loves you, and that we'll all embark on this journey in different ways. So I think that's what I'll share about that, and pass it on to the next panelist. I think is Scott.
Thank you, Caroline. And thank you, Jim, and for the other folks behind the scenes sort of making this process possible. That was a nice sort of introduction and overview that Caroline's provided about healing. If you've been to this before, you know that my kind of day job is I teach at the university. I'm also a therapist here in town. So a lot of my life is about helping people grapple with the process of transformation. And what I would say about healing, sort of on the psychological or the sort of everyday level, is that, when we're uncomfortable, when we're unhappy, when we're feeling or thinking things we don't enjoy, it's very natural and instinctual as humans to want that to go away. I just want to stop feeling this way. And what I'm forever talking to people about is if you could just will yourself not to feel things, you would, or think things, then you would, and you would never need to talk to anybody about it. But it's a little more nuanced and subtle than that. So I would reiterate something, I guess, that Jim said, is that healing is a process most of the time. It's rarely a momentary flash and then everything's better. But if you think about what it takes for us to heal or transform or to be made new, as some of the language that's used in the Bible, my sense of it is this, that rather than rushing away from our suffering, our discomfort, we might actually want to slow down and pay attention to it. It might be trying to tell us something important. If you look at the lives of the saints and the disciples and the Christian mystics and saints through the tradition, there's often suffering and pain in these people's lives. In fact, that's often one of the ways God speaks to them. Richard Rohr says that God usually comes to us when there's real transformation going to happen in your life. It's either through great love or great suffering. And it's usually great suffering. Because nothing clarifies and purifies like, wow, I am really not happy right now. It's all you can pay attention to. It's all you can think about, usually. But when I'm working with people about trying to transform those things, the first step is to really slow down and really look and listen to what's happening. What are you saying to yourself about your life and your situation? What are the thoughts that come automatically that make you uncomfortable or make you sad or make you anxious or make you whatever? What do you believe about that? And what are the feelings? But as we become more and more attentive and aware of those thoughts and emotions and things that might be making us uncomfortable, rather than just trying to shoo them away or pretend like they're not there or not look at them or whatever might seem like a strategy, rather than saying, well, I shouldn't think that and I shouldn't feel that and I shouldn't say this about my life, it's actually more helpful to notice it and bring compassion to it. And what I mean when I say bring compassion is if you're feeling really lonely, let's just say that's where somebody is. That's a very valid feeling. You feel lonely, you feel disconnected, you feel like you don't have the friendships or opportunities that you might have had at other times. To say I feel lonely is not meaning that anything's wrong with you. It's just a feeling. It's just a neurochemical response that's going on to what's happening in your life. But can you bring compassion to that feeling? Open your heart to it. Open your mind to it and softly bring it closer to you. There I am feeling lonely. And when I feel that, I might feel sad and I might feel like no one cares about me. And by bringing love to it or kindness to it or softness to it will actually help a discomforted feeling much more than trying to push it away. And as we do that over time and begin to notice how the patterns of those things for us and get less reactive to what we think or feel, more accepting and compassionate to what we think or feel, those feelings will actually begin to soften and move and transform. So I often say that the work in sort of the psychological realm, and it really is the psychological and spiritual realm, is learning to accept what is happening, bring compassion and love to it. And it is that process more than anything else that will begin to transform it. That's how I sense that we are made new in love. So I'll stop right there and we'll talk perhaps about that more a little later.
Wonderful. And I will jump in right there because, I would love to continue to extend some of that and the idea that not only checking in with how you're feeling in that healing process, but what is your body telling you? We talk a lot in our CREM model, our community resilience model, about tracking. And tracking is really the idea of checking in with your body and listening to what your body is trying to tell you. So for example, it might be the ability or skill to notice like wow, my shoulders are really tense, or I'm sitting like this, or my leg is really tingly and I didn't notice it until I was just checking in with my body, and really learning about how to read the sensations of what your body is sharing with you too. And so in that process, you learn not only to kind of track your own thoughts, but how is your body feeling? What is it trying to tell you? Those whispers, years ago, Oprah had this book where she talked about the whispers and then the bricks, and how oftentimes we get whispers and our body's telling us and God's telling us, and, the Spirit is telling us, and we get whispers. And if we plow ahead and we're not listening and we're not open, as Scott said, sitting with that whisper for a minute, the whisper will pass us by and we'll get hit with the brick to something that stops us in our tracks, to we didn't hear the whispers and now it's right here and we've got to figure out how to deal with it, right? And so part of that is not only listening to and tuning into what you're feeling, but also what are you sensing in your body, right? What kinds of ways is your body hinting that you might need to be working on something different or thinking about something differently. And that can look different for people across the lifespan. So kids, for example, when their body's telling them something, they may get, in their healing process, they may get tummy aches or headaches. They may begin to have nightmares over things that don't seem connected. So kids' fears can often appear disconnected to what they're actually worried about or scared about. They can have repetitive play where they're kind of playing the same kind of themes over and over in their play. And then as we get older, sometimes that healing process looks like avoidance for us as adults, right? Oh, I'm not going there. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. We're moving forward, right? And we really do, and I am guilty of this too. We really do have a society where it's kind of like, pull yourself up, put your big girl panties on, all of those little phrases that we say all the time, like just keep it moving, right? And while it's good to be forward thinking, it can do a disservice if we don't allow ourselves the time and space to heal as we're growing, right? So sometimes we have to have that incubator when things, when adversity strikes. Yes, we want to be resilient, and we'll talk about resiliency a little bit later, but we want to be resilient, but we also need to give ourselves the time and space to grieve whatever it is that we need to grieve. And that can look very different. So the stages of grief are the first one is typically denial or numbness or shock. We're just kind of like, what just happened, right? We're kind of in that state. And oftentimes we then bargain, and we can think about this throughout COVID. Like there was like shock at the beginning, and then we were bargaining. Do we need to wear a mask? Do we not? Do we really need to stay home? Do we not? Like all this bargaining. And the third stage is depression. So oftentimes once we realize the bargaining isn't necessarily going to fix it, we can feel, sadness and depression. And then sometimes we move to the anger stage. We're really angry that we can't, we're missing out on opportunities and missing out on gathering together and that kind of anger. And then the last stage is acceptance that this is happening. There's not much we can do. So we're going to figure out how to make the best of it in the middle of it. And oftentimes those stages, although they're described as 5 different stages, they're not necessarily linear. People can bop back and forth between those stages. They could be bargaining and then angry and then numb. So it's not necessarily the same pathway, because everybody's healing journey is a little bit different. But I think it's important for folks to know that those stages are normal, and they're very typical of the grief process. There's not one journey that is the right journey. And it really is connecting and listening and giving yourself time to feel and process and also grow. What are the whispers that you're hearing about how I can thrive in the middle of what I'm struggling with. And so we'll continue to talk about those, but I think I'm supposed to pass it back. So I think we have some questions.
Thank you, Kelly and
Sure.
Scott and Caroline. I think that's great wisdom for all of us. And just to jump right in where you were, Kelly, some people talk about possibly a 6th stage of the grieving process, which is meaning making. And that probably has even bigger significance for us coming out of COVID. Would you care to comment on that? And then if you want, Scott, you can jump in as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we know when we talk about grief and just kind of thriving despite hard times is, yes, we've all had the struggles, but how do we then think about using those struggles to grow? How do we make meaning of the time that we've had in quarantine or through other trials to pull out the flowers in it? What are the ways that we're getting new information about who we are in Christ, who we are with our family, who we are with our community, so that we can almost fine tune, polish those areas that we really want to grow in our lives, and also pull out those weeds or those pieces where we're like, yeah, that really was out of character for me. And though this showed me that I'm maybe not as strong as I thought in this arena, right? So it helps us to figure out where our strengths are and highlights where we still need growth and still need to adapt and change and evolve. And I loved Reverend Sell's what she talked about earlier around that very thing, that even if we find that we might not be as strong as we think we are, we know that God loves us regardless. And there is not anything that we can do, no matter how many, weeds we have or flaws that we might have, or times that we feel like we're stumbling in this healing journey, we can always get back up because we have God with us. And so I think the meaning making is also connected to that, and that we're not going through any of this alone. And so those are some of the big whispers and that we can hear if we're listening through hard times.
Thank you, Kelly. Scott, did you want to add anything there, or Caroline?
Well, the only thing I would say is that I think you were talking about meaning making, that obviously for people of faith, that is typically one of their deepest and most important meaning-making structures. But what gets confusing is that the messaging from, you're just growing up in a church environment can make you feel like that if you ever have doubts, or you feel like you're not happy, or you feel like you're not your best self, that somehow you're not doing your faith well. Well, what we actually know is that pain and suffering and developmental transitions that we go through in life are very normal. And that one of the ways that we transform and grow our faith and get deeper in our faith is often precipitated by times of doubt or times when we don't feel as connected to God. So I thought I would just say that, but in case anyone is feeling that or has felt that at times because of some sort of struggle or challenge that they're going through at the present moment, I would want them to hear that that is normal, in the sense that at times in this journey, even though your faith is a deep meaning-making structure, there will probably be times when you feel like, I don't feel it right now, or I don't feel close to it right now. And I would just say to you, yeah, welcome to the club. That's the journey that we're on.
Thank you, Scott.
The only small thing I would add is, it's funny you say the phrase meaning making, and I definitely jumped to when I would work in youth ministry, and that is such a big piece of youth ministry, working with teenagers, is creating these meaning making moments. And I would expect Kelly or Scott could talk to this better than me, but that being, youth just being always such a time, teenage years of rapid change and needing those meaning making moments to move, kind of to grow, to heal, and that being a natural part of adolescence. And I do definitely feel for youth, college age kids who have been stripped of so many meaning making events in the last year, 18 months. And I do think it's a task of the church, of all of us as a culture, to help create new meaning making moments that are good fits for adolescents to help move kind of into whatever's next. I don't know exactly what those are, but I remember being on a consulting trip with a youth ministry group once and asking a church the first question, what are your meaning making moments? What is it that kids come to and remember and carry with them for years and years and years? And so I don't know, I think for all of us to think about that is how do we create meaning making moments, not just for ourselves, but for others as we move forward.
Thank you, Caroline. We as we prepared for this evening, we recognize there's a lot of things we're going to weave together here about healing. And so we've got some questions that we are going to pose to our panelists, but I would like to invite those of us who are here with us as participants. If you have questions, please feel free to jot those into the Q&A or the chat, and we will be able to see those and respond to those accordingly. One of the great places to start in any kind of process like this, and you gave us a little bit of a hint, Scott, by noticing, but what might be some tips that any of you would give to folks as they begin this healing process, recognizing that, wow, maybe I'm moving out of survival and I can look at things different? How do I begin that healing process?
Were you addressing that to me, Jim? Just wanted to be clear.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott, and then we'll just other folks can jump in after you're done. That'd be great.
Okay, I'm sorry if you weren't intending that for me. It's an interesting question. How does one begin the process of healing? I've often thought that the most important step that people make in the transformation process and whatever the issues are that they're working on in their life is getting to the point where they recognize that something needs to change. And that may seem obvious at one level, like you can tell if you're not comfortable or you can tell if you don't feel well, but we can put a lot of energy into defending and resisting what our life is telling us through our feelings, sensations, our bodies, our thoughts, and all of those things. And I'm so struck by the biggest moment seems to be sort of like step one in AA. I realize I'm powerless. I cannot do this. So I need to become something different. So I would say that if anybody's really seriously thinking about what does it take to heal or transform themselves, I would say it starts right there with the recognition that something needs to happen. And perhaps I don't know how to do it. So I'll stop right there for this moment.
I would 100% agree with that. Those aha moments where it might be really obvious to loved ones or to others that, that resistance is happening to change, but just identifying and being okay with the fact that you've identified something that does need to change or shift and that you want to work on that. Some folks are able to identify it and work through it, and some folks need some additional support to be able to work through and process their healing, what they've been struggling with on their healing journey. And so that pathway can look very different. The other thing is potentially learning some practical tips, getting skilled at noticing when you are hurting. So we're talking about these aha moments sometimes for a bigger piece, but getting more skilled at when you're feeling off. Right. Sometimes I've heard over and over from folks that have said, like, I didn't realize how much I needed a break until I took a break. That's just an everyday concrete example of how sometimes we get in automatic mode and we don't necessarily build in the time and space to reflect on where am I? Where am I with my wellness and my healing journey? We just kind of go. And so with that being said, another practical tip can be thinking about, like, how are you spending your time? Are you creating the space, perhaps the quiet moments to check in with yourself and have that reflection time? So one practical tip would be building in space, even in your calendars, to think about planning to do nothing, right? We were always to block off our calendar around like all the different events and Zooms and meetings, but really building out space to be and to just kind of sit with yourself and reflect. Maybe it's through meditation, prayer, yoga, like all different things that help us just go inward and check internally to see how we're doing. And so practically kind of setting some time every day for that kind of reflection can be helpful as well.
And in the church, we call that Sabbath. So just to throw that out there, that this is connected to the faith journey too. I know that's a gift that our faith gives us.
Kelly, one of the things that we'd love for you to talk a little bit about, one of your key focus areas has been resilience. And I think all of us have found that our resilience has been challenged during this time. And it may be a painful recognition that, wow, maybe I didn't respond to this as well as I thought I could. And now I'm in a place where that makes me worry about what the future might hold. How do I think about that and go about that process of building that resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we think about resilience as that grit. We talk about grit, where when you fall, how do you figure out how to get yourself back up and to be even stronger in it? So when we talk about resilience, I refer to it as thriving despite adversity. How do we have hard times, stressful times, and still not only be okay, but grow in the middle of the mess, right? And so one of the strategies around building that is reflecting, even in the middle of the mess, what am I learning about myself in this process right now? What have I learned that I want to continue to cultivate in my life? And are there places in the mess or in the stress that I want to trim out? Right. So things that perhaps I thought were really, really important that I'm realizing maybe not are as essential as I thought, and really reflecting. And that comes back to meaning making as well, in terms of what resilience and meaning making are connected in that way, in terms of what kinds of things am I learning about myself and how do I use that in the future. So perhaps, for example, one of my favorite books is called The Wounded Healer. And it's the idea around how sometimes folks that have been wounded, have been through difficult times, end up being able to move through their journey and find that their journey was because they are now positioned to then help others. And so that resilience is not only meaning making, but how do I focus on what I'm learning in this process and how I want to use what I've learned moving forward, and not just the negative pieces of what I've been through. Fred Rogers, one of my heroes, talks about, look for the helpers. You will always find someone that's helping. And it's really that mindset of, do I want to focus on the pain and the stress of all of the things that I've experienced? Or do I want to pluck out what I've learned from it and how I've strengthened myself and how I've grown, and how do I take those qualities and apply them to other areas of my life, right? And so that's really where resilience building comes into play.
Thank you, Kelly. One of the other things that I think that feeds right into that, and Caroline, I hope you might comment on this, that whole process of healing and recognizing where other people are. How do we use our faith to honor that healing process, both for ourselves and for others?
That's a really great question, because, as Scott and Kelly have been so helpful in talking about through this entire 3-part panel, we all have our own grief journey, which means we all have our own healing journey. I know at the church, we're talking a lot right now as we look to reopening for worship indoors specifically, how we have some of you who are want to be first in line. And if we let you, we'll hug every single person in that room. Spoiler alert, we probably won't let you do that. And then there's others of you that, may not be coming back to worship for a long time and indoors, or if you do, I'm going to kind of walk up to you and say hello, and I'm going to read your body language. It's stay back. But you're being brave by being there. And we've just got everyone on that spectrum. So I do think, just like it's been challenging over the last year and a half to kind of wrestle with not quite year and a half. I don't need to extend this longer than it is. Just wrestle with kind of how each of us have operated differently in the pandemic. It's going to be challenging to wrestle with how each of us come out of the pandemic differently. I'm reminded there was a blog post before the pandemic, maybe 2 years ago, by a guy named John Pavlovitz that says, "Everyone is grieving, go easy." And he writes about how he was at the grocery store the day after his mom died buying bananas. And it just hit him like, my mom just died and I'm buying bananas of all things. Like, I'm doing this daily, mundane, boring thing, buying bananas, and my mom just died. And he just hits him like, how many other people are in line buying bananas whose dad just died, or just like lost, maybe not even, let's not think about death, but maybe just lost like the state championship game, or, lost an opportunity, or didn't get the job they wanted, or whatever. How many other people are grieving alongside me buying bananas? And I think that's going to be really key to remembering as we move back toward community, is that we're all moving through somewhere, the grief stages Kelly just said, they're not linear. You bounce back and forth. One Sunday you might be eager to come to worship, and the next Sunday you might have signed up to usher because you got an email from me and you don't really want to be there. You feel anxious, So I think that self-compassion, extending that to others, is going to be clutch as we come out of this. And starting with ourselves, being compassionate with ourselves, I do believe trickles into our compassion toward others. So.
And likewise, you can hear a song, you can hear, you can see someone that reminds you, you can smell somebody's perfume and it reminds you of someone, so there can be all kinds of things that can take you to these different stages. You can smell a banana or, whatever it is, and connect in ways that you weren't expecting and you weren't ready for, right? You were not expecting to go there in your emotions and in your feelings and sensations on that day. And sometimes, it comes to us. And so recognizing and providing that space and grace is going to be critical, because everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different. And I think it's important to mention in the healing journey, a lot of folks think that as soon as COVID resolves, it's going to be fabulous, and it will be fabulous. However, what we know about grief is oftentimes it could be 6 months after COVID resolves that everyone's in a place of like, whoa, what was that? Like, what was that in my life? So there may be some people's healing journey may not start until later. And so I think that's important to know for everyone on the call, especially parents on the call, that you might see kids who are showing some things like, you're like, what's going on with my kids? Or this is different. What's going on? Oftentimes they may not show their signs until later as well. So I think that's important to keep in mind, because sometimes grief can be delayed in that way.
Kelly, I so appreciate that you brought up that notion that we can be surprised. I had one of my first opportunities to gather with a group outside a couple of weeks ago, and sort of overtly, I know I'm happy to be with a group, but then if I looked at where my body was, I was shrinking away from the group because I was a little uncomfortable being in that, and it was one of those things where I wasn't expecting that, but it was clearly a bodily sensation that was different than what my mind was telling me. So I appreciate your highlighting that for us tonight.
Absolutely.
Scott, what would you choose to add at this point to this process of healing and community?
Well, I think, we're talking about a lot of really important things. And what was striking me is just listening to folks share is that the process and journey will certainly look different for different people. There is no one size fits all or right way to think about what healing looks like. It is as individual as the people that there are. And certainly I think anybody that works with folks knows that to be the case. And I think because of that individuality, that it's really important important that people honor their own path and their own experience. We sometimes want to think that things should go a certain way, or believe that we should feel a certain way, or feel some pressure to show up in a certain way. But that just often isn't the way we actually are. And the most important thing that people, I think, need to get comfortable with is acceptance of what's actually happening for them. Just like the little example that you just shared, Jim, of like being in a group and saying I enjoyed being with the people, but at the same time I was aware that I was like, my body was pulling away. There's two experiences happening at the same time, right? Like one, psychologically, I'm like, oh, it's nice to be with these folks. And another level is saying, whoa, I don't know if this is safe. Both of those are true, right? And so just being able to hold grace for what's actually happening with us as we go into these new things. And we've been used to looking at other people and feeling some anxiety or fear for a year and a half. What will it be like when we're told that it's okay not to do that anymore? That will be strange, for sure. Yeah.
And I think, just highlighting again that I think, the difference in the journey and really actively working to not judge somebody else's journey will be critical, because we're all going to have different approaches, and we're human. So we will often jump to a conclusion or a judgment. And I think as we are continuing, I don't want to say coming back to community, because I think that community has happened even in different ways. But as we're continuing to build community, I think that could be a threat to that connection and growth if there's a sense of judgment. And so really just kind of keeping in mind that not everybody's going to want to hug. Some people might be wearing 5 masks, and that's their choice, and they can do that. Some people might not have a mask at all. So everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different. And I think keeping that in mind is critical. Even in your own households, it could be very, very different. As a concrete example, when somebody is sick in my house, I'm like mama bear nurturer. My husband, when he's sick, he's like, leave me alone. Don't check, just leave, don't talk. And so I'm like, hi, you doing all right? And he's like, go away, right? Go away, just leave me alone. I just want to be like, I'll be fine, versus like the nurturer. And so again, people handle struggles very differently. And so we have to map on our approaches in a way that helps their recovery process, their healing process, without assuming that the way we would handle it is how the other person would want to handle it too. And so really being sensitive to that, both in our homes, as well as I think in our communities and in our congregation as well.
One thing I've been thinking a lot about as we move, as Kelly said, we've been in community, but maybe our community expands. Coming out of COVID, one thing I've been thinking about, I think will be a challenge for a lot of us, and I say us, not just you or me, but is not feeling as known maybe in at least the church community as you felt a year and a half ago. Kind of coming back to worship and not feeling like as many people are up to date on what's going on in your life, especially if you haven't continued, if you're not part of a small group or a class that's continued through this time. And I've been thinking about how I think that's going to be a challenge that will surprise a lot of us. And so one thing I'll offer as you're kind of moving toward community is to look for small groups or Sunday school classes or places that you can really begin to feel known again. If you find yourself in that large worship space on a Sunday morning, feeling like people don't know you very well. I really think that's going to be a challenge. It's going to surprise a lot of people when you think about like moving back to a place is not the same as it was when you once lived there. People talk about that. I think coming back to church may not feel the way that we might expect it to, and we'll have to kind of look for for ways to make new meaning there. So I'll offer that.
I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that could be the case for many people. And they, without mentioning that, they may feel like it's only them. It's like, this is different. This is, I wasn't expecting this. It's, and the feelings that come with that as well. And so I appreciate you bringing that up.
And it may mean that we need to, I think one of you earlier, Kelly, you said about creating space. We may need to, as we regather in community, create space just to allow people to have that opportunity to move back into that space and get comfortable. Because even though we've all been comfortable in that space before, it may take a little while to get comfortable in that space again. Are there any other things that we might be able to do? We have all walked this path together in some form or fashion. Are there other things that come to mind that we can do to take advantage of community as we heal together and recognize that we have all walked a somewhat similar path, even if it has impacted us differently?
Something's coming to mind, Jim. Like, this may seem like a little bit of a strange analogy given where we are and how we're talking, but in one of the things you do if you work in like the business that I work in is when people think about healing and going to a therapist and working on themselves or whatever those things are, you think about sitting down with some counselor or psychotherapist and talking one-on-one. And that's true. People do that for sure. Or if you're upset or sad, you may go share with a person that you trust or feel safe with. That's often what we do. But there is actually a lot of value of sharing important feelings and experiences within groups. And, we are very social animals. We very much are built and designed to live and function in groups. Our primary group is our family. Then we have small groups or friends or classes or work cohorts or whatever these groups are. So I think, part of this will be like making space to tell the stories of what experiences have been like. And even though somebody else's might seem really different than yours, if you can listen, like really listen with caring to what somebody's story is about, that is helpful to them. That is such a gift to give someone, is deeply listening to what they are telling you about whatever it is, this experience or parts of this has been like for them. It doesn't have to make sense to you. You don't have to agree with it even. You don't even have to understand it fully. But the attempt to say, I will listen with deep patience and kindness to what you are sharing about what all this is about for you, is incredibly helpful to people. So I would say if there's anything we can do in community and in groups, it would be some way that we can let people tell those stories, and we hold them with kindness.
Yeah, and to extend that, I think that one of the powers of connection with other people is just the joy that other people can bring to our lives. And I think God intended us to be in community with each other, and part of that is laughter. And so when you ask that question, I think a lot, in many cases, people may need a release of, let's get together and just be in partnership and share stories that also can bring laughter. So things like COVID experiences, we see all the time in commercials, even around, somebody showing up in Zoom and they forgot to put, the pants on, like all these different ways that people are finding laughter in the connections that they've had, and how different experiences through COVID may bring connection and also a release of, the toilet paper scare. And, like what lengths did people go to find toilet paper for a while, and just kind of thinking about ways in which people can connect through also through laughter as well as a release. So definitely, as Scott said, listening and encouraging people through their journey, and also not forgetting about the power of laughter sometimes too, and humor, and how we can connect and heal through those stories as well.
So you're saying we should compile all the bloopers from our worship recording?
I imagine that people would love it. I mean, this is not necessarily, what everyone would want to do.
Yeah, but I hear like my coworkers sometimes have things that they record.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We just did a work back together party, and we played COVID bingo, and we talked about, like, on your bingo card, what, did you have this experience over the last year? Did you have this experience? And it just allowed people to just kind of like talk about their experiences in a lighthearted, humorous way to kind of get them connecting. And sometimes those types of formats can help set up for kind of the deeper conversations of, those are the funny things that happened, but here's what also happened. And this was really a challenge. And, we were struggling with this, and build that connection, with others. So. Mm-hmm.
Well, I see we've had a couple of folks jump into the chat and ask if there is a way that we can share these stories. And certainly that's one of the things I think that we can take away, Caroline, is looking at ways that we might be able to share stories. And another person has asked about other new groups. We certainly can think about that. And Sam just chimed in that certainly we do have some ideas rolling around. So, I think we'll have plenty of opportunities. And I definitely am in line for that blooper reel. I want to see that one, Caroline, and I think we'd all enjoy that.
I pass that on, put it on the worship planning agenda.
Yeah. It really also demonstrates too that we don't have it all together. We're all trying to figure this out, and we all fall. Like, we all stumble, and being able to say, I wasn't at my best at that point also is a grace example of, like, we mess up too. And it's okay for you to mess up. And it's okay that you maybe weren't the best parent on every single day of quarantine, and you weren't the best employee on every single day, whatever your role is, that it's okay to not be okay on some days. And it kind of normalizes that process and allows people to connect through being human, right? And how we're all working and evolving and growing together. So.
There was more than once during the pandemic, Kelly, where I caught myself and recognized that here's everybody trying to behave normally as if everything's completely fine. And the reality is it's not. And we're all dealing with a variety of challenges. So thank you for that. As we start to move to the conclusion here, we have been so blessed to have the three of you together. And Scott and Kelly, Caroline's going to close us out, but I wanted to invite you if there are any final words of wisdom that you might share with our group, or any thoughts that you'd want to leave with folks as, again, we begin this healing process, recognizing that we're not done at 7:00 tonight, but maybe in a position to better get started.
I would just say thank you so much for allowing the opportunity, the time, and the space to have these discussions. And while we may be facilitating, or at least I'll speak for myself as one of the facilitators, I also learn and grow in these conversations as well. So thank you for letting me join your community for the series.
Yeah, I'd certainly echo that. It's been a joy to be a part of it and just to listen and learn together. If I would say, I guess anything as a sort of final takeaway would certainly be to invite everyone to deeply honor what their experiences have been and what they are. But if you were to, when we think about going back out into the world, if you haven't, it might be important to think a little bit about what is the story you want to tell, or what is the story you have to tell about how all this has affected you, because certainly anyone who's alive today that can remember this, it will be a watermark event that you will never forget and will be talked about for the rest of your life, right? And there is power in, there's telling the story, but also being able to tell a story of perseverance in overcoming something that was really challenging and difficult. Like, so when we go through difficult times, it's you want to survive it, obviously, but then there's also like, how do I create a story of like, this was hard, this was challenging, we lost things or faced things because of all this, and yet, what? So I think my invitation would be something along that line, to begin to reflect on what is the story you would like to be able to tell about all of this.
Well, that feeds very nicely, Caroline, into some of the things that we've talked about. I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, well, and I'll just echo my gratitude for you all, Kelly and Scott, and for Jim as well, and your work on this. We've said, healing in some ways begins now. Maybe it's begun for you, or maybe it'll begin in 6 months. We don't know. Probably a new process of healing will begin for all of us in 6 months. But we kind of have some questions. I have some questions that Sam is going to put in the chat. I think I just saw him drop those there. I'm going to encourage you to maybe consider writing these questions down. I'm going to read them out loud. We'll also email them out as a follow-up if you'd like to wait. But these are questions that we think might help you just begin to reflect, begin to notice your story, the pain and the joy. Maybe even, as Scott said earlier, to be as bold as move toward your suffering. But either way, however you process these questions, to certainly move through some questions that may help you move toward healing. So I'm going to invite you. You may want to, spread these out. Think about one a week for the next 6 weeks. You may want to pick 6 days and journal 6 days in a row. Maybe your 7th day is Sabbath. But however you want to move through these, I just think these are helpful questions to process. And these may be really great questions to grab that trusted person who you process life with, and maybe commit to talking. I actually saw these questions earlier, and Nate and I are coming up on our 5-year anniversary. And I thought, well, these would be good questions to reflect on for the last 5 years. These just seem like helpful questions for reflection. So what's your biggest loss you experienced is one. What is your biggest hope moving forward? 2, what is your biggest fear? What has sustained you over the last year that you want to continue? What are those flowers you want to pluck out? What has been your biggest learning? And then how do you want to approach or structure life differently moving forward? Again, how do you take those flowers and how do we want to continue to build on them as we look ahead? Maybe you did, out of necessity, like build in a quiet time because you had to have it. And I don't know, I've been listening to New York Times talking about how some parents have had to do that in the bathroom, hide in the bathroom. But, maybe you found that out of necessity, and maybe that's something you want to carry forward. Who knows? But I encourage you maybe to spend a little time with those 6 questions. That's kind of our closing invitation, or maybe even challenge, I'll say, as we look ahead. So with that, I'm going to close us in prayer and just say thank you one more time and blessings. So let's pray. God, it has been a year and some change. We have all experienced a pandemic. We've all experienced this incredibly intense time in our world that has altered or shaken every single one of our lives. God, as we begin to believe that we might see what is next for us, might be moving into what is next, God, we ask for your help to not move too quickly, but to pause, to trust that you are with us in the story, that we can, through that faith, we can be bold enough to face the story, to reflect on it, to think back to the hard times and the good times, and that the strength that we find there may help us to move forward. God, again, I just thank you for Scott, Kelly, and Jim and their participation, and everyone for joining us these 3 sessions, and pray that your healing touch will be with each person listening now and in the future. Pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Caroline. Again, thank you, Kelly and Scott and Sam. This will be This has been recorded, and so if you want to go back and listen to it again, you're welcome to. And again, thank you all for joining us, and best wishes on the journey moving forward. Have a good night.